So I'm going to just get started with some quick welcome and introductions for you guys. So if you didn't know, you're here to see navigating disability in the legal profession. And this is being brought to you by Women Lawyers Association of Michigan by the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee. So to introduce our panel, I want to start with our moderator. That's Natasha Rao in well, she's in my top corner. Natasha is an attorney with the Allen Law Group, and she focuses on employment and business law. I do want to give her a big shout out because this event was completely her idea, and she's worked very hard to create it from the ground up. So we can thank her for what we get to experience today. Then we've got our 5 panelists. We're going to start with Ann Motl. Ann is a senior counsel at Bauman and Brook in Minnesota. She's a founding member and president of the Minnesota Disability Bar Association, which is the second state affinity bar association in the country that's dedicated to legal professionals with a disability. Lauren Clements is our next panelist. Lauren's a senior corporate counsel at Lifetime Inc. in Minnesota. She is also the founding member and officer at large of Minnesota's Disability Bar Association. So we can thank them for creating that organization altogether. Additionally, Lauren's a founding member and co-chair of her law firm's Individuals with Disabilities Affinity Group, as well as a member of the Inclusion and Diversity Council there. Next, we have Jill Babcock. Jill is the Director of Fair Housing at the City of Detroit Housing and Revitalization Department, where she's created a citywide fair housing strategy with an emphasis on accessible housing, as well as a department-wide Rehabilitation Act of 1973 compliance plan. Jill is a council member on the Michigan State Bar Elder Law and Disability Rights section. And then we have Valerie Kutz-Otway. Val is an attorney with Children Triple Law offices, and she practices in probate litigation and estate planning, with a special emphasis on assisting people with disabilities and mental illness. She is the author of ICL's Michigan Guardianship and Conservatorship Handbook chapter on guardianships of developmentally disabled persons. And last but very not least is Justice Richard Bernstein. Justice Bernstein sits on the Michigan Supreme Court. He's been there since January of 2015. But prior to his election, Justice Bernstein was a tireless advocate for disabled rights as the attorney heading the Public Service Division of the Sam Bernstein Law Firm. So we are very excited to hear a lot of amazing information from all of these panelists. I'll let Natasha get us started.
Thank you so much, Susie. And I do want to echo, I know Susie gave me a shout out, but this would be impossible without Susie as well. I'd like to thank our esteemed panelists for being here today and taking a shot on some cold emails I sent out. I appreciate your time and effort for being here. Again, my name is Natasha. I'm going to have the honor of moderating today's conversation. And just for reference, for universal access norms, I'm in glasses and I have a bookshelf behind me. Before we dive into our conversation, I just have a few housekeeping items I wanted to go over. Just to start, conversations in this space vary in terms of use of language. There is a difference in preferences between disability first versus identity first language in these types of conversations. Today, we will be deferring to the panelists' preferences as they speak on their own experiences. Also, as a note, at the end of today's panel, if time permits, we will be having a Q&A session. So please submit your questions to Susie through the WLAM function, the WLAM icon in the Zoom chat. She will be relaying those questions to the panelists at the end of our discussion. And so with all that being said, I'd love to jump in. So to start, I want to invite each panelist to please introduce themselves, their background, and what connects them to speak on today's topic. And to start, I would love to hear from Justice Bernstein.
Hi, everybody. First off, this is a fabulous panel, and I am so delighted to be here and be a part of it. First off, I'm so excited that we're having events and activities like this. With the way that things have been going lately, we need more events like this. So anytime you do an event like this, you can always call me and I will be happy to participate, because I love what we're doing. And I think it's needed now more than ever with everything that's currently happening within our government structure. So the fact that we're able to have a conversation, able to talk about it, be able to do this kind of work on DEI is so important, and it's kind of in jeopardy now. So the fact that we're out there still doing it, I think makes a huge difference for a lot of people. But I would just want to start off by saying that, ultimately, I come to this as a blind Supreme Court justice. And ultimately, I guess at the end of the day, um, as a blind person, I think it makes you a really positive judge, because you're not able to have the same prejudices that everybody does. You're not able to see what someone looks like. So you don't know their color. You don't know the types of things. Vision often is the kind of thing that allows or creates more prejudice. So I think being blind and being a judge is actually, in a lot of ways, a benefit rather than a weakness.
Thank you so much, Justice Bernstein.
You bet. And I love your law firm. You guys are the nicest people. You gotta tell David I said my warmest regards.
Um, to continue, I would love to hear from Ms. Motl.
Hi, thank you for having me, and really thank you again for organizing this as well. So my name is Motl. I practice product liability defense at Bowman and Brook. I have a form of muscular dystrophy and use a power wheelchair, and I also use dictation for my typing. It is interesting working in product liability defense for me because, we are representing companies in a lot of lawsuits filed by people with significant disabilities, but I think that's also been a positive for me because it helps me make sure that I'm emphasizing with all parties and, still working with my clients to advocate them in the best way I can.
Thank you for sharing that. Ms. Kutz-Otway, would you like to continue?
Thank you, Natasha. My name is Valerie Kutz-Otway, and I am a Caucasian female with long blonde hair and green eyes. I wear glasses. Behind me is a multicolored metal sculpture on a slate blue wall. I practice with Chalgen and Tripp Law offices, as Ms. Chalgen said earlier. I suffered a stroke at the age of 20, essentially a massive intracerebral hemorrhage. So that's what brings me to this panel. So my law school career was as a person with disability, as my entire practice as an attorney has been as a person with a disability. My practice primarily focuses on probate litigation, which means I'm typically helping folks with disabilities, mental illness, aging issues, things like that. And I think that one of the things that helps me connect with my clients is that sometimes I can say, you know what, I've been where you are. I really enjoy that.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Sharing these personal experiences can be really hard, and so I do appreciate all of your honesty and transparency and sharing your experiences. Ms. Clements, would you like to continue?
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. My name is Lauren Clements, and I am wearing a whitish gray sweater. And I have to say, I was thinking about my hair. I have just past my shoulder length hair, and it is dark blonde, although I'm realizing here in this video, it's starting to look very brunette. So I'm not sure what to do with that. And then in my background, I'm in my office, but my background is blurred because it's very uneventful. But I am a senior corporate counsel at Lifetime Inc. And I actually just switched over to here. I was practicing at a global labor and employment law firm for the prior 5 years. And so kind of switched over to the in-house life. But actually, it's interesting my journey to getting to speak on this topic because I was born with a physical disability, and so I've dealt with it my whole life. But in law school, I didn't speak on it. My attitude was I'm going to be an attorney and I don't need to talk about my disability. That's totally separate. That's something I want to deal with, you know, on my own time in my own personal life, but don't want to bring that as part of my career. And then I had a circumstance that kind of forced my hand where I actually missed a summary judgment hearing because there was no accessible parking at the federal courthouse. I circled for about 45 minutes, tried making calls, was repeatedly hung up on, disconnected, transferred, and actually thought my career was in serious jeopardy when I got back to the office waiting for the shareholder, thinking that was gonna be kind of the end. And I was very surprised to have been met with a lot of support and empathy, where they actually really encouraged me to speak up a bit more about these circumstances and start to help highlight some of the issues that people with disabilities are facing in the legal community. And before I knew it, I am routinely speaking on these panels and became a part of starting, along with Anne and many others, our Minnesota Disability Bar Association. And so just glad to be continuing the conversation.
Well, we thank you for your advocacy. It makes a huge difference, and for sharing your story. Miss Babcock, would you like to continue?
Sure, thank you. I am a Caucasian woman. Like Lauren, my hair is supposed to be dark blonde, but it is looking very brownish. I'm wearing a pink sweater. Behind me, I have just white walls and a door. I'm in my home office. What is not visible is the fact that I am sitting in a wheelchair. I am the director of fair housing for the city of Detroit and pretty much all accessible housing, compliance and whatnot. I do have to add that being in a wheelchair is actually as awful as it's been for my entire life. It is a good thing for my job because I'm able to bring to the table both lived experience and my legal training. And I also am able to connect with residents in fair housing, and they're much more at ease sharing stories of discrimination with someone else who has been there than always seeming to complain. You know, nobody likes Nancy. So there you have it.
Thank you for sharing that. I think going through these experiences and being diagnosed or presented with a diagnosis, it comes with its own host of challenges, and there's so many different ways that any individual can deal with that. And so I'd like to pose to all of y'all, throughout your legal education and careers, how did disclosure play a role? Obviously, Ms. Clements just talked about how that wasn't something that she necessarily considered in law school. But perhaps later in your career, what considerations have come into play when deciding whether or not to disclose if you have a disability, illness, or condition? And what has disclosure looked like for you? And so to start, I would love to hear from Ms. Kutz-Otway.
So my disability is primarily physical. I have right side hemiplegia, which means that my right arm and my right leg don't work very well. And that makes it extremely difficult at times to walk any great distances, to hold anything heavy because I have to keep it all on one side and that throws my balance off. I typically decide to disclose when I'm going to new places. I think I mentioned earlier that I'm a litigator, so I go to a lot of courthouses. I go to places where there are depositions. And so particularly if it's an unfamiliar location, I will call in advance. I will disclose to the other attorney. I might disclose to the court staff that I'm a person with a physical disability. I'm mobility impaired. I need to know exactly how far the distance is going to be from, one place to another. Is there going to be an accessible parking space close enough for me? One of the things I find is sometimes accessible parking spaces are designed more for persons who use, wheelchairs and less for persons who can't walk very far. Yeah, I've had situations where I didn't call in advance, and one particular situation I remember quite clearly. I arrived for depositions in northern Michigan, and the depositions were upstairs in a building that had a very narrow, creaky staircase, and I wasn't able to do that, and we had to move the deposition to another place. So I think generally what I'm trying to say is that I disclose for purposes of accessibility more than anything else.
An interesting perspective as when the need arises. Ms. Clements, you gave us a little bit of an example of how this has affected you. Would you like to speak more on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting, I mean, similar to Valerie, is that my disability is very physical, very apparent. And so I think in law school, although I, didn't necessarily speak up on it, it was more so I don't want to, at that time it was, I don't want to start or join any disability associations. I was very anti-disability law at that time of I don't want to make that my entire identity, because I feared that if I did that, I would be pigeonholed and it just would consume me. But I think when it came to disclosing my disability, it's less so about disclosing, of course, that I have one because it's so apparent, but it's disclosing some of the struggles I might face. And I think that to this day is a huge challenge for me. I think there's moments where I really want my colleagues or those around me to understand what it took me to get to work today. It's kind of a marathon just to get here, and so I think that I've had different opportunities to speak up more on that and become more comfortable with it. But it's been interesting just changing jobs after being somewhere for 5 years, where of course I got to know many people. I think many of those colleagues were really surprised to hear that I said, I'm not really talking about my disability at my new job. It's there. I, let them know that XYZ could happen. I'll let you know if I need anything. But I haven't really opened up more about it. And it's not because I think that they wouldn't be open or welcoming or super supportive, but it does go back to, like what Valerie said, more about accessibility. And if I don't need something, then I'm just less likely to open up about it. And I'm sure I could probably use a little therapy on understanding exactly why I don't want to speak up more about it. But I do think that disclosure is a very challenging point for many people, especially if it is not already apparent. I dealt a little bit with that too during COVID, where when I'm on Zoom, you can't necessarily tell I have a physical disability. And coming out of COVID, I kind of felt like I was having to disclose myself and almost coming out as a disabled person all over again. And that was a challenging time, but I think disclosure is just such a personal choice, and it really depends on your specific situation. But I just always would advocate too of don't fear disclosure. I would much rather encourage people to get what they need and get the support that they need, as opposed to suffering in silence.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I do think there is a huge element of fear that accompanies these types of conversations. And so, Justice Bernstein, we'd love to hear from you on this as well, as it pertains to considerations that come into play for disclosing a condition.
Well, first off, I want to introduce Alex Casperson. She's the one who's helping me here kind of, navigate through this webinar. And I think that ultimately, I think the other panelists are pretty amazing. You put together a fabulous panel, and I really have enjoyed what everybody's been saying because I just think it's great that people are so open about it and that people are so willing to share about it. I like the other panelists who was talking about having a physical disability. Basically, I mean, there's no real disclosure when you're blind because I use a cane and it's pretty apparent when you walk into the wall that you're blind. So people kind of know that you have a disability, a physical disability. I think where it became a real problem for me was when I was doing job interviews. I interviewed with 65 law firms. I went to Northwestern. And that year, Northwestern had a record job placement year. Like it was a record year for them. I think I was the only person in the entire law school who did not get placed at a law firm. And that was after going to 65 interviews. And the fact that they saw that I was blind, ultimately, I think had an issue because I did pretty well in law school. So the simple fact that I didn't get a single call back, I think kind of showed kind of the challenges that people that have disabilities have to face if they can't hide it. If you're going to a job interview, it's just easy for people to kind of move on to whoever the next candidate is. It's easy for people to look at it and say, when they go back to the law firm and they say, okay, there was this really interesting guy and he was blind. And then they start thinking to themselves, oh, great, if we hire a blind person, we're going to have to make all these accommodations. We're going to have to retrofit the office. We're going to have to bring in all this software. We're going to have to do all this stuff. Can't you just go on to the next person? And they'll be like, okay, yeah, we'll go on to the next person. It's easy just to kind of bypass the person that has a disability because you look at it as a challenge and it's something difficult and it's something that, is going to be cost prohibitive. The other thing that people tend to worry about when we're talking about disclosure, and you have a physical disability or physical limitation, is they're worried that if they hire you, they can't fire you. That if they give you a chance, that if they aren't happy with your performance, they can't get rid of you. That there's no way to fire somebody with a disability without getting sued or having a lawsuit, brought before you. So that I think makes the disclosure, discussion, I think, very relevant because that's where I think it really comes to play. It comes to play with job placement, job interviews. And I'm just excited that a lot of the people on this panel all were able to find employment because I think it shows how talented these folks are, that they were able to overcome their disability and overcome the fact that they had to disclose it because people can see it and still nonetheless find really good and gainful employment.
Thank you for sharing that. It's disheartening to hear that that was your experience. I would hope that things are changing as we move forward, especially in seeing how successful our panelists here are today. Thank you so much for sharing that. Ms. Babcock, would you like to continue?
Sure. I actually want to repeat everything that everybody before me has said because I've had these experiences. I've tried to go private many a time and I haven't. You'll see I have an LLM. One of the reasons I have an LLM is because I wanted to boost my legal and not make my disability right out in front. With that said, that reiterates Lauren's previous comments that she wanted to be a lawyer for lawyers' sake, not for disability rights, but for lawyers. And that's how I started as well. My LLM is in tax, but I find now that I've swerved over to disability rights, I am passionate about them and lived experience, I know what can go wrong and sideways, and I want to rectify that. As for accessibility, I was not forthcoming. However, I am very candid about my disability if you ask me about it. But not many people know that I have a congenital neurological or neuromuscular disease that has been undiagnosed my entire life. And I fall under the umbrella of ataxias. I don't usually explain that to people. They assume it's multiple sclerosis, but it's not. The other thing I want to say is, even though I don't disclose that, which is quite visible, I do also have many invisible disabilities, like inflammatory bowel syndrome, which I don't usually tell anyone about.
I think the discussion between physical and invisible illnesses and disabilities is a whole can of worms in and of itself. And so thank you so much for sharing that. I think it is very difficult when you're not presented with any other option other than disclosure by nature because of having a physical disability, and that invisible disabilities, it's even more scary to disclose on top of that then. Thank you for sharing your experiences. Again, the honesty, I think, makes such a difference for us who are listening and learning how to be more inclusive and how to be more accommodating and accepting in this environment. With that being said, it's clear that this process doesn't look the same for anyone. There is no one size fits all in terms of navigating this type of path. Every illness is so different. Every condition is so different. Every job in the legal field is of a different nature. Regardless of those things, each of you has been able to develop a successful business or practice within the judiciary as an advocate or as a practicing attorney. And so in your experiences, what have been some of the unexpected challenges in handling this? And what have been the tools that you've been able to use to manage these circumstances? And Ms. Babcock, I'd love to start with you this time around.
Unexpected challenges. There have been quite a few. First of all, I was not raised to understand that people visually had stigmas. I did not even know, really didn't understand the term discrimination until I was out of my childhood home. My parents were civil rights activists, so I think I have an interesting life tale. But because of that, it was a rude awakening to find out that I would be treated differently. Now, when I took the bar exam here in Michigan, I'm a lot older than most of you. So the state bar did not have any protocols or procedures for accommodating. What happened was I asked for the accommodations that I had been enjoying throughout law school and was denied. I was primarily denied because they had no system in place to allow me these accommodations. I then went to the Department of Civil Rights and had that denial reversed. But I don't know if anyone else in this panel or audience had to take their essays by oral exam. And it was entertaining, shall I say the least. I'm glad I had the opportunity and I'm glad I passed, but that was a bit much of a heavy lift. I guess I've had unexpected situations and challenges throughout my career, but the other panelists will probably highlight theirs, and I'm sure they match.
Thank you for sharing that. That is very difficult to hear, and congratulations though on persevering regardless. It's incredible. Ms. Clements, would you like to continue?
Yeah, I think, gosh, I think the biggest challenge I've had is trying to get those around me to understand my disability and the ebbs and flows of it. Every day is a little different, and I think that has been just really hard for me to be able to help others understand why one day I don't need anything and everything's going great and I'm super on top of things, and the next day I need to hop offline a little early because I need to, whether it is I need to get to physical therapy, or I need to take a pain medication, or I need to just do a variety of things to be able to take care of myself. And I think what I really struggled with, just to be totally candid, was I put a lot of that aside at the start of my career and thought I had proven myself. I thought the performance reviews and everything really added up to indicate to me as though, okay, I have proven I am trusting, I am capable, I can be a star associate, whatever this or that. I can finally now start opening up a little bit and maybe having a little more flexibility with my schedule, or, being able to have a little more control over the, type of matters I'm working on or the scheduling of them. So that way I can now finally balance and take care of my personal health. Unfortunately, that didn't quite prove to be true. Instead, it started to be viewed as though I'm no longer capable. And I was a little shocked and disheartened by that. I thought this was behind us. And so I think in some ways, actually, that's what forced my hand a bit to go in-house. Was I had a very heavy litigation practice. And realistically, I got to the point of I don't want to have to sacrifice my own health in order to be a great attorney. I want my work to just reflect the ability to balance those things, especially when, not only do I want to be able to take care of my disability, but I want what we all love to call work-life balance. I want to be able to incorporate those types of things into my life too, and not have to sacrifice either my career or my physical health. But so I think that's been one of the most challenging aspects for me, is just realizing the ebbs and flows of having a disability, and realizing that even if we are in a great space where people are far more understanding and supportive of disabilities and wanting to support attorneys with disabilities, the reality is that unless you've lived it, or if you have someone very close to you that has lived it, your average person just can't quite comprehend how that all goes. And that's something that unfortunately you do kind of face in your day-to-day life as an attorney, I would say.
Thank you for sharing that. I think something that I've learned in discovering this process is that if we don't have our health, we don't have much. And so learning how to advocate for yourself in a work setting can be very difficult. So sharing those experiences, it means a lot to all of us. So thank you. Justice Bernstein, would you like to continue?
We got to unmute. Are we good?
Yep.
So I just have to say that these are the best I've been on a lot of panels and done this a lot. And I just have to say that these are the best panelists I think I've ever been with, because they're just, first off, they're incredibly successful. But I think in addition to that, they're great communicators. And it's not often that you have, panel discussions like this that actually I think are as interesting as this one. And I was actually just telling Alex that this is really, without question, just a wonderful, wonderful group of people that I hope that we can all keep in touch afterwards. And I think that, in terms of the hurdles or the things that were unexpected that ultimately, happen, I think that, I think the most important thing is that you have to look at this in an optimistic, viewpoint, right? So the idea is that there's going to be challenges, and the things that Jill was saying, which is, the fact that she was denied accommodations, that's a pretty remarkable thing to have to hear, but yet it happens all the time. And I think what I'm hoping from this panel is that this ultimately turns into a bailiwick that ultimately is used by law schools or used by the bar administrators to basically say, look, when somebody is applying for accommodations, they need those accommodations, and those accommodations are not giving them an unfair advantage. They're not putting them ahead of anybody else. They're not doing anything like that. Those accommodations are simply done to allow for this to be an equal playing field so that we can participate. And the biggest fight that people with disabilities have, that I had as well, is a fight over time. And I never really understood why that was even really a problem or an issue as to why people fought so much over how long it takes you to take a test. Why is that such a big deal? I mean, no one in real life, the bar exam is the worst. They're very difficult on this, and they basically are going to say, okay, we'll give you X amount of time and that's it. But in what universe does somebody walk into your office and say, I need you to write me an essay and you have 5 minutes to do it? I mean, that's just not how real life works. So I think that to deal with some of these unexpected challenges that sometimes arise, that we've heard from our panelists so far, I think that the best way to deal with it is that ultimately a law school or the bar examiners or any of the administrative bodies that we have to deal with, basically to survive and allow for us to be able to do the work that we do, I think what it really comes down to is they simply have to basically ask themselves, if we provide this accommodation, what is the impact going to be in a real life, real world scenario or situation? And if the accommodation isn't going to be something that is going to have anything other than an academic or intellectual basis to it, then there's no reason why it has to be so difficult to get the accommodations that we all have to fight for. And this is something that everybody on this panel has had to fight for. No one has basically just said, I need accommodations and gotten them. Everyone's had to go through a denial, had to explain, had to go through all that. And that's the normal kind of scenario that we all go through. And I'm hoping that, this panel, the people that are participating in this panel, as well as like the people that are kind enough to listen and be a part of this, my hope is that they realize that, we are all people that add, we don't subtract. We provide just a level of understanding and appreciation of situations that non-disabled people don't. And when you have diversity, the reason that it works is that these different perspectives can allow for people to learn in different ways, see things in different ways, and have a unique understanding of the world in a way that they ultimately didn't have before. So as it pertains to what's unexpected, I think it's all the panelists are going to come to the same conclusion. It was unexpected how every little thing had to be a fight, and every little thing had to be a challenge, and every little thing had to be a battle. And that we have to explain ourselves constantly so that we can basically have even the most rudimentary of opportunities provided to us.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I also think that the language of we add, we don't subtract is going to be an affirmation that I use from now on. I don't know about y'all. I think that's really wonderful. So thank you for providing us with that. Ms. Motl, would you like to continue?
Yeah, that's a hard one to follow because I feel like it's just so spot on. I actually think as far as unexpected challenges, my first job out of law school was working for a judge. I felt super accommodated. It all went very smoothly and well. My unexpected challenges came when I started private practice. I think some of it was disability related, some of it was just the grinds of the profession. I was diagnosed with anxiety my first year of private practice. I experienced family death. I had 2 surgeries related to my disability. So it's just all of those little things add up, and trying to figure out how I could still take care of myself while also trying to improve myself, like Lauren was saying, was a huge challenge. And I don't know that I know there's still times when I go too hard in my work and make myself sick. So I can't say that I've overcome those challenges yet, but I know that I'm getting better and I am more explicit with my needs. Like I will not work after 9 p.m. I get 8 hours of sleep. That means I can't do some social things or some work things. That is what it is. But you know, and obviously that's optimistic. I can't always say that I make my promises to myself, but that is just what I have to do to be successful, despite my disability.
Thank you for sharing that. I think boundaries are very difficult, but a valuable tool that we can use. It definitely comes with discipline and structure over time. But I do think that it's wonderful that you're still working on it every day, and it means a lot. Ms. Kutz-Otway, would you like to add anything?
Just want to kind of bounce off of some things that Lauren and Justice Bernstein already acknowledged. And I think my biggest unexpected challenge has been how other people react, I think. You know, not only to the disclosure, but to requests for accommodations. And in saying that, I want to acknowledge that I'm very fortunate and that I have an amazing supportive community of people around me, not only in my work life, but also in my personal and my family life. But that being said, you know, when I'm saying that I need A, B, or C, and, you know, people saying, oh, well, we'll just help you. You know, if, let's say for the sake of argument, you know, there's not a curb cut when you can't make a step up or, you know, you can't make your wheelchair up and people offer to help. Well, I'll lift the wheelchair, I'll do this, or I'll say, you know, they'll offer in many sorts of ways without really understanding that, yeah, I appreciate the help, I appreciate the offers, but those things are supposed to be there. And I expected them to be there and they're not there. So I think that's probably my biggest challenge that I've had encountered.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think it speaks volumes as to some of the progress that we still have to make in terms of creating accessible environments for everyone. And I think that leads very well into the next conversation topic I'd like to address. I think one of the tools that we often use in addressing these challenges is accommodations. And I know that everyone has touched on their experience with accommodations. And so I do want to in part ask what accommodations have made your experience in navigating this career easier. But what accommodations would you have liked to have seen? And I know, Ms. Babcock, you touched on that in terms of the bar exam itself. But I know that things are changing, especially for those in law school who are transitioning into their legal careers now. I think this is an important conversation. A lot of people don't know what to ask or what accommodations to even look for. And so we would really love to hear from y'all and your perspective on this. And to start, I would love to hear from Ms. Clements.
Accommodations, a tough topic in some ways, because I think there's a lot of accommodations that we've already all mentioned we'd love, but don't always get. But I think, you know, it's been interesting too to see the dynamic again between being in private practice and in-house, because I think in private practice, it was just accommodations to just survive. You know, it was having an adjustable desk that was, you know, thankfully pretty easy to get. That was easily granted. Things that were, I think, a little bit unique that I was surprised to find out were unique, of having the option of intermittent leave and that still applying towards your billable hour requirements. That was a huge help. The downfall to that is workloads weren't necessarily reduced by the same amount of leave that you're using. So yes, you have the hours, but unfortunately the work is still there. And so I think, you know, what I always spoke about wanting was flexibility, flexibility and support with the workloads and managing my schedule, for the reasons I mentioned earlier of if I have physical therapy appointments, or if I, you know, wake up one morning and mobility just isn't quite there, you know, wanting a little extra time in the mornings, wanting to make sure, for instance, no meetings are scheduled before 10 a.m. just to allow that buffer. That was hard when you're in private practice and you're working with, you know, your shareholder schedules, your client, opposing counsel, you know, and I think the irony is where I went in-house is particularly unique because it's lifetime fitness. So it's the fitness centers that I think many of us know throughout the country. And their entire mantra is a healthy way of life. And so it is just naturally built in to not only my work-life balance, but everyone here of how are you taking care of yourself? And it is now naturally expected that I would take time for physical therapy or going to the gym or doing whatever I need to take care of myself. And what's resulted in that is a flexible work schedule that I always wanted so desperately in private practice that just wasn't realistic given just the parameters of private practice life that I'm finally seeing in in-house life, just because it's a different working environment and you're working with a smaller team of people that you can coordinate with. And so I would say that, you know, when it does come to accommodation, something that I really struggled with, but I think that is important, is I was pretty adamant of wanting to identify the accommodations I want and not caring, I don't care about private practice and, you know, the grind of it. I want my accommodations and I want it to work for me, because I was so adamant that I can do this job. But after being able to take a little step back and take a breather, I realized that some of that is just the grind of private practice, and it's okay that I don't want to do that, or I don't want to have to beg or demand for certain accommodations that I think will somehow make it all work. It's really nice to be in a work environment that just better reflects those natural balances that I need to take care of myself. And so I think I think it's important just to note when we're talking about accommodations, yes, there are accommodations like work from home, adjustable desks, intermittent leave, but I also think there's those other types of accommodations we don't necessarily think about in this realm of maybe it's a different kind of job. And there's no shame in that, because you know what, now I'm living my best life and that's great. So it's okay to also, you know, make those decisions for your own career to that best serves your whole self as opposed to just one single part of you.
No, I really love that. And I do think this panel is so unique in the sense that we have been able to have visibility and representation in the various industries throughout the legal profession. And so I do think it varies so significantly depending on what type of law you practice, what type of role you fill, and where you might work. And so with that being said, Ms. Kutz-Otway, would you like to continue?
Certainly. So I think in my experience, the first time that I really had to think about accommodations as it relates to my profession was after I did unbelievably poorly on the LSAT. So I didn't think about the fact that extra time might have been helpful. I didn't even know that was an option. I didn't think about the fact that maybe some technology might have been helpful. I didn't even know that that was an option. But as I indicated earlier, my right arm doesn't work very well. So if you can imagine trying to hold a Scantron sheet and fill in the bubble all with the same hand, it takes some extra time. So thankfully I encountered someone who was very kind and very knowledgeable at my undergraduate institution who talked to me about that extra time, technology, that sort of things. Those things were very helpful, and I think they were absolutely instrumental in my being able to get through law school and do well and complete exams in the time given. And I use a lot of those things now in my practice too. I'm loving the idea of like AI note takers. So I can be fully present in meetings with clients and not be worrying about whether I'm getting all my notes correct and if I could even read them when I'm done writing them down. I also love the fact that Zoom meetings have become so prevalent, because if I'm not having a good day, like some of others have said here, and I just cannot get out of my house, I can still have another avenue to connect with my clients. And as it relates to my house, I've always been a big proponent of, and my husband's been super supportive of this, of creating a solid home office environment. So there's nothing that I can do at my brick and mortar office that I can't do at my home office. So whatever I'm feeling or facing on any given day, if necessary, I can still get my work done from my home. So those have been some of the accommodations that I've used through the years.
Thank you for sharing that. And I do love the idea of how technology is also helping us in this space. And I hope to see that continue. Ms. Babcock, would you like to add your thoughts?
Sure, thank you. I have to give a shout out. My favorite accommodation is the touch screen. I don't know where I would be if I didn't have a touch screen. And you'd think it'd be easy to get as an accommodation, but it wasn't. I had to argue for it. And it wasn't until I used the word accommodation that people started listening. I am not one very good at asking for accommodations. I'm the kind of person that knows what doesn't work, but I never really ask for avenues to make it work. This remote work, I am working at home almost 100%, whereas none of my office is. That's probably an unspoken accommodation, but I never really requested it, and they never really granted nor denied it. It was just assumed. Now working at home has a lot of pros, obviously. Like Val has said, this Zoom is fabulous, and I can't always get out of my house, but it also has a lot of cons. And health-wise, I think my own personal health has taken quite a dip. So I think there's a balance between the accommodation and what it does to you. And I think people have to be mindful of that. And if they get an accommodation and it's not working, it's taking too much out of the other half of them, for instance, their health, then they should be able to change it out. And it shouldn't be as difficult as everybody makes it. Nobody understands the rules behind accommodation. And I personally am trying to educate as many people and entities as possible about those rules to make it easier to get the accommodation.
Thank you for sharing that it's a balance, and it's one that every individual has to work out for themselves. Justice Bernstein, would you like to add your 2 cents?
So I think that this goes to the general concept after listening to all the other panelists. It reminds me of the analogy of when you check into a hotel, and as a blind person, they always want to give you the ADA accommodated room. They're always like, oh, we have this room and it's an ADA compliant room. But that room is the worst room you could possibly give to a blind person because it doesn't have boundaries. So the idea of a room that's ADA compliant, it's great for people that have other types of disabilities, but for a blind person, you don't want a room where there's no boundaries. Like, for example, you don't want to roll in shower because you're not going to know where the boundary is of the shower. So we like boundaries. So that's why blind people don't want an ADA accessible room. We want a standard room because it has boundaries and we can navigate and learn those boundaries. And I think what this comes down to is that everybody thinks that accommodations are universal, and they're not. Like, for example, what Jill was saying, about using a touch screen. I mean, I hate touch screens because there's no way a blind person can use a touch screen. So I think what we have to always remember is when you're working with a disabled person is understand that everyone is different. Everybody has their own issues. Everybody has their own challenges. Everybody has their own difficulties. So ultimately, like also blind people, as a blind person, I just don't like Zoom because it's very hard. I can't see anybody. So I like to be in person because you can interact with people, they can interact with you, you're able to be close to them, you're able to have that close proximity. So not every accommodation is a universal accommodation. And the key to it is that if you're doing employment or you're hiring somebody with disability, you know, if you find out what the disability is, but also find out how you can best accommodate that disability, but also know that it's individualized. It's highly individual. And it basically goes down to what the individual requires, what the individual needs, and ultimately allows for them to succeed. So like, I hate working from home. I know other people, like I've heard other panelists say that they have home offices and they like to work from home. For me, I hate it because it's isolating. I like to be with people. So it's just one of those situations where, you know, ultimately the accommodations that I need, you know, like going into the office is something that I like to do, or using, you know, different types of technology that aren't necessarily Zoom related. But as you know, I have Alex Casperson here from the Attorney General's office, and she's amazing. But if she wasn't here, I wouldn't be able to really participate in this discussion today, because Zoom is something where, imagine trying to do Zoom if you're blind. It just doesn't work for a blind person. You don't know where to look. You don't know how to look. You don't know how to set it up. You don't know how to basically log into the different rooms or the different places you have to go into. So the pandemic was the worst thing ever for somebody who was blind. But Zoom is fantastic, or emails and other things are fantastic for someone who's hearing impaired, because they love the fact that things are going to be inscribed and that, you know, they can work at it that way. So I think just the key here is, from an inspirational perspective, is just know that everyone's an individual, know that they have their own individual needs, and know that if you give them accommodations that fit their specific identity, you're going to have a loyal, hardworking person that can basically allow for you to be successful. But you have to figure out what is the key thing that works for each individual, and know that disability is very individually based, and that not all disabled people are the same, that we're all different, and not even the same blind people. You can't just accommodate two blind people the same. You have to go to each individual, what works for them, what is going to be best for them. And if you allow for them to have what works for them, they're going to be very successful in the workplace. My hope is that from this experience that we're having here today, that there are some employers that are listening, or people that work in HR, and they're going to say to themselves, you know what, let's take a shot. Let's give this disabled person a chance. Let's hire someone that we otherwise wouldn't have. Let's do something different, and realize that the accommodations that you're giving them, whatever they're requesting, are minimal, they're easy to do. And the one thing I just want to emphasize too, even though, you know, I was talking about employment, which I think is the biggest obstacle that we face, is that, you know, look, even if a disabled person can't perform and isn't able to do the job, you can fire them. You can put them on a work plan and basically say, here's an improvement plan. You can either meet this or you don't. But you can fire a disabled person just like you can fire anybody else, and you're not going to get sued. So this is all about giving people chances, all about giving people opportunities, but most important, realizing the individual story that each disabled person has, and how that story can be brought to bear in the most positive of lights.
Thank you for shedding light on, I think, the dissection of accommodations and how it truly is no one size fits all approach.
I just
I
want to
think
say,
that's really,
you're a wonderful moderator, because I have to say, you do such a nice job. Like, thanking people for like the points they bring up, that just is such a nice thing to do. That makes people feel so good.
thank you, Justice Bernstein. I appreciate that so much.
You're just a delightful person, and I think that really comes through in how you moderate. But it's just nice, like when you say to somebody like, hey, thank you for bringing up that point, that's a really nice thing to do, especially to disabled people, because usually when we bring up things, we're usually either, you know, people don't want to hear it, or they aren't that interested. But when people are actually excited to hear what we're saying, that actually means a lot to us.
No, thank you for saying that. I do think this conversation is so impactful, and I know all these little nuggets of wisdom mean so much to all of us. So thank you. With that being said, Ms. Motl, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, definitely. So I think completely agree with whatever everyone has said already. For me, one of the things I'm passionate about for accommodations is logistically, how do you get them? And it depends on the person, it depends on the accommodation. I've gotten to the point where now when I don't bring up my accommodation request before I get a job offer, but once I get that job offer, I will find out like who in HR do I need to send my accommodation request to, send them over, make sure they're all approved before I accept the job. Like, if there really were issues, that's really not somewhere you want to be working anyway. Um, but I just like to do it because it just makes me feel confident that my needs are going to be met. So I have just like a long letter of like, here's the things I need. And I think one of the most important ones is Dragon Naturally Speaking. So that's the dictation software I use. And it's great because I can physically type, but it's also really good for lots of other people, disability or not. I have a friend who is dealing with long COVID right now and has difficulty typing, and I've just been encouraging her. I'm like, ask your employer to let them have to let you have Dragon because, like it's hard for some of us to ask for accommodations because, I mean, for me personally, it's sometimes hard to ask for things that you need. It just gets exhausting having to do it a lot. But like, just think about it. Like, this will allow you to be employed by them, and we are such worthful or such valuable and loyal employees, and just deserving of employment like anyone else. So if this helps you have that job, then that's something they should do morally and legally. So those are my thoughts
I
on
also
accommodations.
I love that. I also think it's a really good point that a lot of these accommodations aren't necessarily just for individuals with a straight out disability. Anybody might be living with an illness, whether that's temporary or permanent or a condition. And I do think all of these conversation points apply to anyone in those categories as well. And I think that's why this conversation is there's such a big umbrella. And I think it's so hard to touch on everything, but I think you all are doing it so magnificently. So thank you. I think the next talking point is very, it surrounds accommodations, and I think disclosure and this conversation in general, I know that we've all experienced based on the conversations that have been had today, there are stigmas associated with disclosing a disability, a condition, or an illness. And I think we've made strides in the legal community. It's clear that all of you have been able to, despite adversity and dealing with challenges along the way, build very successful careers. So I think that's amazing, but I do know that there's still work to be done. And so I would love to hear from y'all. Do you still think there's a stigma associated with these conversations, with disclosure, with seeking accommodations? And if so, how can we as a legal community come together and provide support for individuals in these situations? And I think overcome that stigma over time. And Ms. Motl, I'd love to start with you this time around.
Yeah, I do think there is still a stigma. It has gotten a lot better. I started practicing 10 years ago, and like Lauren, even though I have a visible disability, I would not really bring it up when I started practicing other than, going to HR and being like, please, I need this. But I think, I've just been seeing from so many more people in the legal industry topics on wellness, resiliency, all of which I think lend themselves to practicing with a disability and other challenges. And I think conversations where you can hear from senior leaders or judges or, anyone else that are in positions of power in the legal industry, when they talk about the challenges they've overcome, whether or not they're disability related, those I think are huge and are a big step in removing stigma, because this career is not a straight line for many people. There are going to be so many challenges, and we just need to be kinder to ourselves, kinder to other people in practice. And so trying to be more understanding, I feel like is huge.
Kindness goes a long way. Justice Bernstein, would you like to add to this talking point and how we can overcome this stigma and come together as a legal community?
Well, I was just talking with Casperson, and I have to tell you something. We love the last comment. That was fabulous. Kindness goes a long way. That is a really wonderful thing to say, because I think that's what it really comes down to. And I think that if you're talking about stigma, which is what we're talking about and what we're focusing on, I think the biggest stigma, here are the stigmas, and I think this is what people think, that we're charity, that we're slow, that we're not able to perform as well, that we're here as a token. Those are the kind of things that I think people look at, that you give a job to a disabled person, wow, that's great, you're a charitable person, you're a kind person, that kind of thing. Nobody looks at it from the perspective of, we actually bring something to the table. Nobody brings it from the perspective of, we actually can create awareness that you don't have. Nobody brings it to the perspective of, that we are, as we talked about before, as we said prior, that we are a gain at a loss. Nobody looks at it from the perspective of, if I hire this disabled person, I'm doing something really exciting, unique, and wonderful, because I'm going to make my company stronger and better, that we're going to be able to reach out and connect with more people. You know, I was just in Egypt actually for a speaking tour, and this I thought was a fascinating statistic that was really remarkable. But it was, and get this, and this is a true statistic, and this is, I thought this was remarkable, but over 35% of the Egyptian population had a disability. Over 35% had a disability. A lot of it was due to the fact that it's a developing country and that you had a lot of diabetes that had led to other disabilities, but 35% of a population had a disability. Think about what that means, and you know what that ultimately entails when you look at the situation and kind of understand it from that basis. I think ultimately here in the United States, we have a very high number of people with disabilities as well that go into our ranks and are part of our jobs and are part of our communities and that make consumers and all those types of things. But one of the things that will help break the stigma is, if you, and I'm talking to now like HR people or to anyone that has a job opportunity that they're willing to present. But this is the key thing to it, is that if you're willing to hire a disabled person, you're really tapping into a market that you otherwise wouldn't be able to tap into. And the stigma was, when I was a litigator, I had, I fought with Delta, I fought with University of Michigan, I fought with the bus system, I fought with everybody to provide accommodations. And there was one thing that people would always say that would lead to a stigma. They'd always say, why do we have to build a bigger stadium or better stadium for disabled people? They don't come to games anyways, so they're not going to come. Why do we have to do this? Disabled people aren't going to come to these games. And that in every lawsuit. Well, guess what? When U of M had to make their stadium fully accessible, they were breaking down the doors. They had record numbers of people that were coming to the games. Their population and their market share went up dramatically. This was amazing. When Detroit Department of Transportation had to make their buses fully accessible, ridership went up by 30%. Every time. Delta even decided that these accommodations that they were forced to make through a consent judgment or to consent decree were not that hard to do, and yet made the flying experience better for everybody, especially for people who are seniors. And they found that the more accommodations they made for the disabled, the more seniors enjoyed flying them. So they actually went and decided they were going to go beyond the consent decree and provide more accommodations than the court was requiring them to do, because they found that it was just good business. This just makes sense. And we always have the same arguments because people are worried about cost. What they don't realize is that you're investing and you're doing something that's meaningful and decent and good at the same time, but it's also going to have a beneficial result on your business, on your entity, on what, on whatever you're involved in. You involve more people in it, you're going to have better business. You provide accommodations, you can have more people. So we can break the stigma. We don't just stay home all day and not go out. We want to go out and do things and be a part of the community and be a part of the public.
No, I love that. I think creating spaces for inclusivity creates spaces for everyone. So I think that's very meaningful. Miss Babcock, do you have anything to add?
I do actually. I'm thinking about disclosure, and I have been one to disclose too much. I've tried it. I've tried being very open. I've tried being very close. Neither one seems to work for me. But I will say about the stigma, yes, I agree the stigma still exists. And unfortunately, you probably would not be aware of that if you were a completely able-bodied person. Not many people are, but oddly, I'll say I went to law school many moons ago, and back then there wasn't anybody in my graduating class in my school who had a disability. And we certainly never spoke outright on panels like this. And there was no education on disability rights. And we all know the Constitution, we all took constitutional law, but somehow certain laws like the Rehab Act were disregarded. I think it has gotten better. We are still, we're talking about it, we're open, but I also want to be wary that we have a long way to go. It's nice that people are open and candid, but we have to keep repeating ourselves till people start hearing what we're saying.
No, and I think that's why these conversations need to keep taking place. So thank you for sharing that. Ms. Kutz-Otway, do you have anything to add?
Just briefly, because I think it's going to be saying almost exactly the same thing Jill said. But I remember years ago, my mother-in-law said, and she was talking about children. Children don't know what they haven't been taught. And it just kind of like resonated with me. And I think about that statement in the disability context a lot. Like, and so I think that, you know, along with that, people fear what they don't know or what they don't understand. So conversations like this, and continually saying the same things over and over and over until people hear it and until people acknowledge it, I think it's really, really important.
Thank you for bringing that to our attention. I do think that these conversations, I hope, will keep taking place, and with y'all being so open, I think it makes a huge difference, but it is tiresome as well to carry that burden. So we thank you for being open. Ms. Clements, would you have anything you'd like to add?
Well, everyone has made such great points. You know, I guess I can offer a little bit of a different perspective on it too, in the sense of, I think there's also a fear at times of the pendulum swinging all the way to the other direction, where suddenly, you know, being the token disabled person of, gosh, if we hire you, you're disabled, and that's awesome, and we want that in our environment, and we want you to speak on that, and we want you to teach us more about disabilities. And so I think on the one end, you have that stigma and fear that people aren't going to take a chance on you, or if they do hire you, that you're going to require all these accommodations and be challenging. But then on the other end, I think we're also seeing a little bit of movement where, yes, these conversations are happening. And people are, I mean, even though a lot has been happening in the DE&I space, I still think that, you know, you have a lot of people who are even doubling down and extra committed of, no, we want to take these points really seriously, and we want to advocate for different minority groups, including those with disabilities. But then it's not fun either being caught in that place of like, gosh, like I have things to offer besides being disabled too. And so I think it is a fine balance, right? I mean, I think it's all about having these types of conversations and showing that, you know, we're willing and open to have these conversations, discuss these issues. But we have other things that we like to discuss and can offer opinions and expertise on too. And so I think, you know, we're just in an interesting time with it right now, where I could not be more grateful that these conversations are gaining more traction. And I think, you know, and in all reality too, you know, I think being an employment lawyer, and even at that, being an employment lawyer, representing companies, previously a defense lawyer, and now, of course, working for a corporation, I see the types of claims that come in, and absolutely, do you have a lot that are absolutely justified, but you also have a lot of people that try to manipulate the system. And I think that's where we see employers getting a little jaded too, of gosh, like trying to sort through what is legitimate and what isn't. And that's where I think it's ever more important for those with disabilities to speak openly and candidly, because I think that's what helps kind of diminish that stigma too, and helping to kind of divide between what is real, what is not, what is necessary. So just for a little different perspective, I guess that's what I have to offer.
And I think those fears are valid, and I think everyone has experienced those and having these conversations. But with that being said, I just want to say it takes a lot of energy, and it can be a burden to constantly have to speak about your experiences. And so we are so grateful that each of you has been so willing to be honest and transparent about everything you've gone through. I know I can only speak for myself, but this has been entirely so impactful for me. Before we kind of wrap into Q&A, I did just want to say thank you. I'm so grateful that this worked out, and I know it's been months of planning. Your time and energies are greatly appreciated. And now I think for the last 10 minutes, I want to see if Susie has any questions that she wants to pose from the Q&A. There might not be questions, but
Oh, we don't have questions coming in yet, but I imagine everyone was paying attention, and so they may join us in a minute. We did have one comment that just came through that I'd like to read. So Zanelle Brown said, normalize these conversations. This is what it means to be human. I think that's a great comment to share. If anyone has a question, I'm happy to have you unmute and ask it directly, or I can read it if you'd prefer that way.
One thing I was thinking is, how do we get these Minnesotans to move to Michigan? I think we do have better weather.
Hey, we got some 60-degree weather with a little sunshine right now. Like, I mean, tomorrow, I think this weekend we're back to snow. So I just might make the move. I don't know.
And now
Well,
my
we
firm
would be
has
glad to
off-
have you.
my firm has offices, so I'm really looking forward to visiting those at some point.
That would be great.
We've got someone with their hand raised. Miss Nagpal, do you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, panelists, for such a fantastic, such a candid, vulnerable, real conversation. I am curious to know if and when you've had to advocate for yourself, which we have to do all the time. I'm curious to know, I guess I can also try to be a little bit candid and vulnerable. But did anybody ever have to pick a fight with a law school they went to? And if so, how did you manage the fear of doing that? Because it can be a little bit nerve-wracking to know that your degree is in their hands, and there's a power imbalance, obviously. But yeah, so I'm just curious to know what it took to have that fight. If you have any grains of wisdom, I would appreciate that.
Can I answer? Can I just go right ahead, Natasha? We didn't really talk about procedure of this, but I just want to say I fight with everybody. I did not have to fight with Wayne State, but I did have to fight with UD Mercy. And then when I started teaching at Cooley, I did not have to fight with them. They anticipated my every need. It was actually kind of disarming how good they were about it. I have fought with, and Justice Bernstein knows this all too well, I've fought with previous employers, state of Michigan. I think earlier it was mentioned everything is a battle. It's true. Everything is a battle. So, and they like to say that people with general public likes to assume that people with disabilities just complain. That that complaining is actually a method of enforcement. So I think it's okay to fight. Do not be frazzled, do not be nerve-wracked. These people, these are your rights. Law schools, just like employers, they owe you this support, and it's very important that you go after it.
Hey, Jill, thanks for the shout out. That was awesome. I've been friends with Jill for years, and Jill's had to go through many wars, but she always comes out of them unscathed, and she comes out even better.
Thank you, Ms. Babcock. When you said these are our rights, you literally, it brought tears to my eyes. Thank you.
And Jill's awesome. We muted.
I want to offer too just one kind of practical tip, because it's hard when you're in law school and you mentioned kind of that difference of power and feeling a little bit powerless, right? Like you're working so hard, and it's also tiresome to be fighting for those rights, right? I mean, you're working so hard and using all of your energy and time to fight for that degree to begin with. I highly encourage you to find an ally who is willing to help fight with you. One, I'm not in Michigan, maybe someday, but I can guarantee anyone on this call, I don't mean to speak for them, but I'm nearly certain anyone on this call would be happy to help you. When I was in law school, I would have very candid, direct conversations with my dean. I built a good, friendly relationship with him where I felt like I had that opportunity. But even just finding one single professor who you just get along with, maybe you've never discussed your disability with, but you just enjoyed their class, felt like you got along, take that step of going to them and opening up about some of your concerns, and you will be amazed by how willing people are to help fight with you. But they can't fight with you when they don't know what they're fighting for. And so it does kind of require that just step of bravery on your part to go to that one person or whoever it might be to just ask for help. And so I just encourage you to do that.
And bouncing off what Lauren had to say, I think sometimes that one person or that one ally can come from unexpected places. My fight with my law school was with regard to information about accessibility, because although the campus was primarily accessible, there was no way to find out those things. Like the fact that there was an elevator that was kind of like on a, in an alley on the side of the building that would get you up those, grand steps on the front. And I was very vocal about that with fellow students, and suddenly I bumped into somebody who wrote for the student newspaper who said that would make a great article, and then the editor of the student newspaper was supportive of that. So that's kind of how we got the ball rolling on that sort of thing. I don't know specifically what your challenge is, but yeah, be open to where that support can come from.
Yeah, this is Ann. I'll just hop into you. I think building a coalition of people who will also speak for you, like it's worked here. We've seen it work recently with I think, there was a pregnant student at one of the DC law schools who they weren't going to let her have an exam accommodation, but then she got the attention of her friends, she got the attention of the media, used social media. I mean, it's unfortunate that you would have to, put your law school out like that, but if they really, if they want to work with you, they'll work with you to avoid things like that, and it's their responsibility to do that. So just keep going on and just try to give yourself grace, but you'll do great.
I'll add as a women lawyers member, please consider the women lawyers as an advocate as well. I mean, a number of sections of the bar, there's how many attorneys that love to be advocates. So, but it's not that they all have to fight your fight if they're not at the law school, but I will tell you with at least the Women Lawyers Association, we have an amazing network. There are a number of people who work for law schools who would be a contact person that you could, get in contact with. You said, hey, Susie, what's going on? I have this problem at MSU or whatever it is. Then we know somebody who works there who will step up and help you. So use the networks that are out here to support you. That's why we all join. Ms. Turner, do you want to speak?
Yes, first of all, I would just like to say thank you for having this meeting today as a law student who is disabled and going into the legal profession, hopefully here soon with graduating in a couple months. The talk was both very inspiring and reaffirming of my experience. And I just wanted to touch on the issue with the law school that you had mentioned. I just went through a situation like that. And I'm not going to say it was easy, but I will say the thing that motivated me the most is to try to ensure that the issues that I had were not experienced by the next student. And that was really my motivation behind it. So I would just try to lean in that you're going to make your university a better place.
Right, I will say really quickly, Justice Bernstein has to go, so we're all going to say thank you so much for participating, and we so appreciate that you were involved.
You guys are
Have a
awesome. Are
good
you
night.
kidding? Are we muted?
No, you're good.
Oh, this was fantastic. This is one of the best panels I've ever been a part of. I just feel bad. I gotta go to my next event, but this was fabulous. I mean, absolutely fabulous. And I think it was the panelists were just incredible, and the questions are great as well. But I think what made this such a great experience were the other panelists. And I was honored and privileged to be on a panel with all of you. And the moderator was awesome. So I just actually really enjoyed this experience. And this is something I'm looking forward to doing again relatively soon. So thank you all and God bless.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments that want to be shared? All right.
Susie, how do I reach out to you if I wanted to?
Oh, you can. I'll give you my email right now. I'll message you with it. But basically, I'd otherwise read it, but my last name is very hard to remember. But I'll message you, and if anybody else wants to reach out to me, I am on the website for women lawyers, so you can always look for Susan Chaldron.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, thank you so much to our panelists. I appreciate you being here, and thank you so much to our audience. I think having people interested in this conversation means so much, and I hope we can continue this conversation in the future with different events moving forward. But with that being said, I hope everyone, I hope this was a thought-provoking conversation and that we all took something away from it. I know I did, and I hope everyone has a really wonderful evening.